It's an under-the-radar day of celebration here at the Voice of College Football Oklahoma. If you look at the banner right there, this is our 50th show. So we've made it to 5-0. We appreciate all of your support here again at the Voice of College Football and our Sooners Live show that comes your way each and every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. in Norman. Jason Ray's here to make it all happen from Last Word on College Football. Please check out his work again. Last Word on College Football with Jason, who's been here for 50 weeks. And we would not have a show without Jason, so we always appreciate the conversation. Jason, what's going on today?
Oh, it's exciting. Spring practice is back. We've got some semblance of football back, so it's exciting. Thanks for having me on as always, Mark.
Of course, thank you for having me on. This is more your show than it is mine. I am going to make one correction before we continue the conversation because this is always of utmost importance to a number of people out there. And I can never tell the way the camera angle is going to divide the 2-shot or the 3-shot or the 4-shot or whatever it is. So I know people would not be pleased with. There we go. Now we've got the Sooners helmet right before me, right over the shoulder. So there we go. More importantly, everyone, of course, Oklahoma's back in the football field for spring practice, something that we've been looking forward to and previewing in recent weeks. Leave your comments and your questions concerning spring practice, but understand there's nothing to talk about concerning actual spring practice and what's happened on the field. We can only talk about what's been stated by coaches or what we expect to happen and believe to be important in the next several weeks. Jason, as you had mentioned, this isn't necessarily something that's on the minds of most fans, but the media access should be to a certain extent because it's going to allow more access, of course, and therefore more information and a more accurate and better look, fan-friendly look into the program during spring practice. And I think it's just another that adds onto the list of the difference between the Lincoln Riley regime and the Brent Venables tenure.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Mark. I think you've seen a lot of BV just being much more, I think, much more open, much more friendly. I mean, it started early on, through when Oklahoma announced their recruiting class here in the 2020 cycle, where he spent a lot of time talking with the media. He's done a lot of interviews here early on, where he spent a lot of time talking. And then, to your point, he had his initial kind of spring practice media availability on Monday and kind of talked about the fact that they were going to keep practice open to the media to a certain extent, for early on in the practice. I think I saw where I think Oklahoma's going to have around 33 practices, and probably that includes the spring game as well. So through the spring period. So I think the media will get a lot of decent access here early on. And obviously, as you would expect, they would probably tighten that up a little bit as they get into more in-depth stuff around kind of offense and defense installation and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think he's been more open, more kind of bringing himself available to the media. Obviously, more so than Riley ever was, and so I think that obviously gains you a lot of points. From the media can do a whole lot of things to negatively or positively, as you know, that can you can kind of bring the morale down, bring the program down to a certain degree, depending on that. So I think he's done a good job in this first step, even joking with the media a little bit. He had talked about he talked a lot about recruiting early on, and he had talked about he views recruitment and commitments as not a reservation. This is a commitment. You're not, reserving a spot necessarily if something else doesn't come along that's better. You're committing full on to the university. So talked a lot about that and just kind of made some jokes in terms of like the marriage correlation with commitment versus the recruiting side of things. So I think he's showing his lighter side. Everybody knows that's been around him knows that he's a very fiery, focused, kind of old school coach from that perspective. But I think what he's done a good job of early on is shown his personality side. And for those specifically for those that kind of question his, this is his first head coaching job. Is how's he going to, how has he prepared for this? What's it going to be like versus him just controlling a defense when he has his hands into all parts of the program. So I think he's gotten a lot of good feedback thus far through, kind of the media and through the players, and talked about a lot about Mark, how a lot of players have just went up to him and said, "Thank you so much for the structure. Thank you for the culture that you're building here." And so it's evident that that was not necessarily there in the same way that it's been before. So I think understanding that the players have really, really bought in early on. That's always one of the big keys when the new regime comes in, is buying into that, to what the coaching staff and what the program is selling. So I think Oklahoma's and the coaching staff and as a program, they are making good strides, at least early on.
This tends to break for me a stereotype that I think goes back to a certain extent, because it's understandable that the coach that runs the fun offense, that likes to score a lot of points, that emphasizes a prolific offense, he's more fun, up to date, maybe relatable, good communicator, relates to the players, interacts with the players, is not paranoid about media access, opens things up, and is player friendly. Okay. And then the guy that is more focused on hard work, discipline, technique, football being a physical sport, well, he's old school on the field. Therefore, he must be buttoned up and not relatable and doesn't like to communicate or build relationships with the players. And obviously, those things are not the case. And I think that it's pretty easy to see between the two styles of the last two head coaches. And it will be, of course, up to the X's and O's, or up to the wins and losses, I should say, when it comes right down to it. Brent Venables is doing all the right things now. Of course, if he strings together a bunch of 8-4 seasons, then he's not going to be long for his job. But if he wins more in the 11-win range, as is customary, or maybe a more understandable rate of success in the SEC, then all will be well. But it certainly bodes well for his ability to acquire talent and have that talent play with pride and passion and determination, and put in the work and the effort, because they see something substantial, something real, something solid, something stable, and a head coach that cares and is invested in their future.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the foundations that they were talking about, at least early on. Ted Roof, Oklahoma's new defensive coordinator in name, not sure what that will actually look like on the field, but he talked to the media a little bit and really talked a lot about that, what they've been doing just from a transformation perspective of just investing in the kids first and foremost. That was the kind of the foundation that they wanted to build through not just football. Football's going to be here, but it's not always necessarily going to be here. It's not going to be your entire life, but setting these kids up for success. So I think that's part of what's, I think, helped the buy-in a little bit, Mark, to that perspective, is just understanding that, okay, these guys aren't just here to get whatever they need to get out of me from a football perspective. They want to invest in my life, and they want to invest in, in what can make me, kind of better holistically. So I think that's also part of it as well. But you've seen that leadership there, I think, very early on from a coaching staff perspective.
One more note on Lincoln Riley, and we've done our best to kind of steer clear of that conversation in recent months after the aftermath of him stepping away and leaving for USC died down. But it is intriguing to see. And the reason I bring this up is because of the comment that's on the screen just about, and there's a few other comments concerning Lincoln Riley and just his abilities. And we will see him in another setting, in another conference with different facilities and resources, but in very much the same tier. I think it is interesting to look at a Lincoln Riley. I'll put Ryan Day in the same category. We saw Nick Saban go to Alabama. And of course, you got to have the resources, you got to have the money, you've got to have all those things, but lift a downtrodden program up to an amazing level. Dabo Sweeney did that at Clemson. Lincoln Riley has done a tremendous job at Oklahoma by most accounts, but he was given a very great situation, as was Ryan Day. So it's just there's a different perspective on those guys that haven't proven to be able to lift a program. And we're pretty much given one of the top 3 or 4 programs in the country in looking at those 2 particular coaches. Now he goes to a place in USC where we'll see if he's able to resurrect a sleeping giant.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Mark, when you compare the two. It's very, very, to your point, he was set up very, very well for success at Oklahoma through Bob Stoops. They had started recruiting a lot better. They had a lot of talent within the team itself. So I think it'll be interesting to look and see how these situations differ a little bit, right? I mean, he's got a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball at USC, but maybe not quite as much on the defensive side. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that to see how that goes. I think a lot of Oklahoma people will be very invested in watching that. But yeah, I mean, I think the difference has been, excellent point that you made from the comparison with Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day. I think what's kind of manifested itself through Oklahoma, and maybe not, and I don't think necessarily is the same can be said for Ohio State. It seemed to be turned into more kind of a country club atmosphere where they've been, there was a comment there, and they've been called soft, the program just in general. So I think, that's definitely not something that I would ever use to compare to, to describe, the Ohio State team over the last few years. So I think that's the one obviously key difference. But make no mistake, both of them are offensive geniuses. So I think they'll have a good offensive team, and I think it's just a matter of how good they'll be on the defensive side. And did Lincoln learn anything from, and maybe he doesn't believe that's the case, but did he learn anything from kind of the softness and, how Oklahoma just wasn't able to play championship level defense, and what that needs to happen at USC?
And now the Sooners are on the field for spring practice, and all the angles that we've discussed in recent weeks and months will be played out over the next 6 weeks or so as they go through their, as Jason outlined, 33 sessions. So it will be interesting to see what we can gather from, again, the upcoming weeks. So Ted Roof, defensive coordinator, has met with the media. Jason, I know that you didn't take anything huge away from him addressing the media, but was there anything there to go on?
Not really, Mark. I mean, he talked a lot about approach, kind of the approach that they have taken as a staff to this program, and talked a lot about where he'd been. And anybody that's followed Ted Roof's career knows that he's jumped around a lot. At one point he was a head coach at Duke, and then had just moved around kind of the ACC area, really predominantly SEC a little bit as well. Previously, obviously at Clemson this past year. So I think, I think he brought a lot of kind of comparisons to what does this look like at Oklahoma versus some of the places that he's been before, and obviously talked about the differences. The program Oklahoma is a much better program than the places that he's been, probably minus Clemson, right? So I think that was more, talked a little bit about the approach that they have taken off the field, just kind of investing holistically in the kids, really, as opposed to kind of looking at them specifically as football players. And I think, kind of an interesting question was talking about his son TD, who's a senior this year, has transferred from Appalachian State to Oklahoma. And there was a question asked on just exactly how what the difference is in having your son play for you, as a player, and talked about him. He's always going to be his son, and but at the same time he'll coach him as hard or even harder than maybe some of his other players as well. So it's once practice starts, there's not a whole lot of difference. So I think it'll be. Yeah, he was the only one that I had heard about any kind of media availability after right there before practice or after practice yesterday. But no, I think it's. I think we'll start hearing some more information anecdotally, but talked a little bit about you know he felt like the installation would happen. It's not one of those things that he was extremely concerned about. They've got a lot of familiarity with the defensive side of the ball with Brent Venables, Todd Bates, Miguel Chavis, and obviously Ted Roof that were there in Clemson last year. So I think a lot of them kind of speaking the same language and really kind of understand on what they're trying to do defensively. So it didn't really feel like the installation was going to be something that's going to be very difficult or something that's going to be a challenge heading into the spring practice. But a couple of other things that were interesting. Talked a little bit. Talked a little bit about the approach that he's taken here versus other places. Just looking at it from from that perspective, based on maybe the talent level is the same. Felt like the talent level was really on par with what he's seen. At Clemson, it's just really kind of getting them to play their style of defense, which is a little bit different than what Alex Grinch played at Oklahoma. So someone even asked him to compare his defense compared to Alex Grinch's, and obviously he didn't get into that any from a comparison perspective, because I think his quote was that that Oklahoma's won a lot of football games with Alex Grinch here. So it's nothing bad that he's done. So I think interesting, and a lot of people looking to going to the spring game and looking forward to the spring game are very interested to see what probably more so than the offensive side of the ball, looking forward to seeing what the change will be look like on the defensive side of the ball.
There's been just a few times that I can think of throughout the history of college football in that I've been a fan or covering the sport that I can think of a coach moving from one program to the next and being honest about the talent evaluation of where they arrived. Meaning, when you leave Appalachian State, like a number of coaches have in recent years, and gone to an SEC program, you don't need to discuss the elevation in talent. It's obvious to everyone knows it. But when you go from Clemson to Oklahoma, it would be interesting to know what's really their evaluation of what they've seen, whether that's, wow, I'm a little surprised here that they're kind of weak here or kind of weak there, and we were much better, or wow, they're better here or there, or these kids really know how to work, or they don't know how to work. We're really going to have to push them. We worked a lot harder there. Whatever, there's got to be, when you leave Clemson and go to Oklahoma, there's got to be things processing in their minds as coaches, for as detailed as they are and for as many football players as they've seen and evaluated and coached in their lifetimes, to know that, okay, we're a top 3 to 5 program in the country. We just left a top 3 to 5 program in the country. Again, it's not your move from a G5 to a Power 5 and understanding, okay, I got a lot better athletes here. But maybe being a little surprised at both positively and negatively at the comparison.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, Mark. And obviously, I don't know that we'll ever hear that, obviously, to that extent. I think the one thing that both Venables and I saw an interview with the new director of football operations, Thad Turnipseed, who was with Saban at Alabama, then went to Clemson, and obviously it's followed to Venables here to Oklahoma. Talked about, quite frank, and said, we're not Alabama, we're not there yet. That's the goal. That's where we want to be, and talked about being where they felt the program was really good right now. But it's hard to get from really good to great, and that's what Alabama's done. And he said, they even talked about Clemson's done that a little bit, maybe not as consistently as Alabama has, of course, but they've done that a little bit. And it's hard to get from it's harder to get from really good to great than it is to get from average to really good. So I think that's the challenge that they have. And I think, to your question, in terms of talent on the field, I think that's the $1 million question that's going to be answered. Maybe not necessarily this year, Mark, but in the coming years. What is the talent level at on the defensive side of the ball for Oklahoma? They've got a lot of 4-star. They're littered with 4-star talent throughout this defensive roster. So I think that the thought is it the coaching staff? Is that what's kind of been holding the talent back over the last couple of years? Because what you've seen, and this is consistently not just with Alex Grinch, but this consistently went back to Mike Stoops and some of the regime there, in the fact that Oklahoma's had a lot of kids that have played really well early on, but it seems like a lot of them have digressed a little bit as their career has kind of developed throughout the program. And you've started to even see that a little bit with Alex Grinch, this past year, and how Oklahoma had started becoming pretty good. I mean, comparable to where they were under Mike Stoops, pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. And then last year wasn't quite, the jump, and took a little bit of a step back. So does the coaching staff that Venables has brought in, because it's probably it's up there with Alabama, it's up there with Clemson in terms of some of the best defensive staff that you'll see in the country when you look at the national championships that a lot of these coaches have won. Whether it be at Clemson or Alabama or wherever they've been. How does that look early on this season? If Oklahoma's a lot better on the defensive side of the ball, throughout the season, then you can say, yeah, maybe the talent was always there. Maybe the coaching, additions or upgrades have really, the talent's there. So that's what we know. Versus, if they struggle, if they're kind of what they were this past year, then you kind of look at it and see, okay, maybe the talent is not necessarily as good as what we anticipated, or maybe the talent's good but doesn't necessarily fit the scheme as well as it did previous schemes. So I think that's going to be so intriguing to watch, not only through the spring but also obviously through the remainder of the season.
College football is truly a pyramid in terms of the power structure. Just think of a pyramid. If you go down like a level, not even that much, it's still very exclusive. It's still very a very exclusive tier to get to. Notre Dame, Penn State, who else you want to throw in there from time to time? It's very difficult to get to that level. But man, Alabama, again, under Saban, and certainly in this playoff, even when they haven't won the national championship like this past year, even when in 2019 they didn't even make the playoff, I would argue that they were good enough. If you put them in the playoff, nobody would be surprised that has half a brain if they won the national champ. They have always been good enough to win the national championship. Then you basically have Clemson, Ohio State, and Georgia. I want to reserve Oklahoma from this because I just haven't seen it in any particular game except for the Rose Bowl Georgia game, where at their best, they obviously all won national championships, talking about those three. And then even basically every year, good enough, even when they didn't make the playoff, they were good enough to make the playoff. When Georgia didn't make the playoff, could they have been in the playoff? Yes. Ohio State, same thing. Clemson, same thing. Oklahoma is kind of a curious example or comparison between those three because of what's happened in the playoff. Again, I will put the Rose Bowl game aside. Even though they lost it, they truly showed that they could compete that particular year with a team that came that close to winning the national championship. But otherwise, it has shown us when fans talk about their teams reaching the playoff and almost use that as the same place as winning a national championship. Okay, we just need to get to the playoff and think, okay, winning the national championship, getting to the playoff is almost the same thing. And it's almost another huge jump, because we've seen it out of the Oregons and Washingtons and Michigan States of the world. They get to a playoff and they're just not there. And Oklahoma a few times.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that's the next step. I don't know that that's necessarily a goal for this team this year, obviously, but yes, no, I think that's the next step. And from your point of in the maturation of getting from really good to great is winning that playoff game. So I think winning that playoff game obviously doesn't put you at the top of the mountain, but winning that playoff game does show that okay, you've made the strides to become competitive in the playoffs, competitive to the point that you've won you've won a playoff game, but and put yourself in a position to potentially win a national championship. And I think I think Oklahoma's doing all the right things. The staff that they've put together. That if you listen to Thad Turnipspeed talk a little bit about the kind of the vision that they have in terms of building a recruiting department that's on kind of at the same level as an Ohio State, at the same level as a Clemson, as an Alabama. They're in the process. They've got the staff in place. Now they got. He talked a little bit about they've got to find a place to put them. From an office perspective, but they've got that, and I think with what him and what Venables has done and the staff, I think they're building. Now it's time to obviously see that product on the field, and I think I think to that point, Oklahoma's not in a position where they're devoid of talent whatsoever. Obviously we know that they lost a ton from last year's team just in terms of transfer portal and things like that, but they've got the team. I think they've got a roster capable of challenging for the Big 12, and if you challenge for the Big 12, obviously you put yourself in a position to potentially make the playoffs. So all that'll play out, of course. But then I think it'll be very interesting to see what the difference is with this team looking on the field. I think at a high level, we expect a more disciplined team, a tougher team, a more aggressive team, a team maybe that plays with a little bit more emotion than they've done in the past. But just in terms of what that looks like from a position perspective, will be really fun to watch. And I think there's been a couple of comments around this, and I think it's probably the most intriguing spring game that I can remember in quite some time, just because of if nothing else, just because of all of the newness. And I know it won't be at this level because it's a different time, different situations are a little bit different. But Thad Turnipspeed talked a little bit about one thing that he said, I have nightmares about this, even to this day. I think it was his first year with Saban there. They had talked about, for a spring game, what's the crowd going to be like? Obviously they went through a few down years comparatively, and they had made the decision where they were talking internally. Okay, should we open the upper deck? Should we have concessions? Should we do this and that? And keep in mind, at that time, there was no. They didn't really charge. Schools didn't really charge for spring games, right? They just kind of, it was free attendance. Anyone, and he said they had about 160,000 that that were there, that walked up, and then he was like, well, "What are we supposed to do? We don't have the upper deck. We don't have we don't have any concessions for them." So, they realized that was that was something that they needed to prepare for. Not that Oklahoma's not prepared for that, but it's just one of those things where that was probably the most exciting spring game that he can ever remember, in terms of just fans being, really, really excited for a new era, new regime. So could see something similar just this year. I think just from not really from a numbers perspective, or in terms of 160,000, but from an excitement, and then you probably see more than you've seen in a long time for an Oklahoma spring game.
How much does it cost to go to the spring game?
Because
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's $15 for general admission.
Okay.
So
I would love to go back to the days that you just cited, where it's free to go to the spring game, thinking that if these people in the administration, in the football program, more so the administration, I would think, truly understand the landscape of society and its fan base, they would understand that they service a ton of high-spirited, loyal fans that just simply cannot shell out anywhere from $50 to $100 to see a game.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, if you've got a wife and 3 kids, you've got 5 of you, and you're traveling from 50 miles away, even to go to a spring game and spend $15 a ticket, $60, 60, $75 for 5 people, and, make it a day of it, you're going to spend a couple $100 at least. I would just think that these large schools could just swallow the cost and say, this is the one opportunity for anybody to show up and watch some football.
Yeah, no, you would think so, especially for those schools that are, kind of still ramping up, right? I mean, you got some teams that have been established, and maybe it's, that if you're going to the spring game in Alabama, like, people are going to pay whatever you want them to pay. I think I remember, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, seeing at Nebraska there was tickets going on the secondary market for hundreds of dollars, and I'm thinking, my gosh, this is a spring game we're talking about here. But yeah, I mean, I think there was some comments here talking about the availability from a TV perspective. So I think Oklahoma doesn't, there may be at some point. I don't know if there's going to be any TV involved with this, but I think if it could be a strategic decision to not televise this to try to get more people in the stands. They're doing some things around Baker Mayfield statue that'll be really exciting, and obviously that's I'm sure that'll get sorted by, well, maybe not, but by April 23rd. But his pending free agency or whatever it'll end up being from the NFL I think will be interesting for a lot of people, because Baker's one of the most beloved Sooners here over the last 20-25 years. So but yeah, I think to your point, Mark, I don't see a problem at all with keeping this free, right? I mean, obviously I'm not a decision maker by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that's something that you would like to see based on the prices that you see for regular season tickets.
Talk college football with us here at the Voice of College Football. Join our Discord. What is Discord? Well, it's just a big chat room that's open 24/7, 365. And go to Patreon, patreon.com. As you read right there on the banner, go to MarkRogersTV on Patreon and sign up. We send you a link, and then you are connected to, right now, about 55 other college football fans, and we will build it out from there. So keep in mind, we've only had this running for about 3 weeks, and we've got about 55 people on board talking college football. So please join us there. Go to Patreon, search Mark Rogers TV, sign up. I get you the link, and you're all set. Jason, there's a few people commenting in the chat, and I wanted to bring this up, even though I don't have anything really substantial to go on, other than I saw our guy, Tony Siracusa, make a response to somebody, whether that was on Facebook or on Twitter, I don't remember. Just, it sounded like Tony had an idea, an estimate based on some information he had of when this move to the SEC might take place in coordination with the 4 teams that are moving to the Big 12. Some comments are made here in the live chat that I find rather interesting, because at least 3 Oklahoma fans believe that once in the SEC, that 8-4 is a comfortable landing spot to get to a 12-team playoff. You may want to run the numbers on that. I don't know that 8-4 is going to do it. Well, let me tell you this. The probability of making a 12-team playoff, even in the SEC at 8-4, is minuscule. I'm not going to say it could never happen, but if you look at the models over the playoff era, in terms of what teams would make the playoff, that would be difficult to size up. But it is going to be fascinating in this transition, of course, because everybody or a lot of people have served up their models of what realignment in the SEC will look like or should look like. And I'm just, this is one of the more intriguing aspects of college football and its structure going forward that I can't wait to see play out.
Yeah, no, me too. And I'm with you. I don't think, I mean, 8-4, I think it just, yeah, it's hard to, of course, it's hard to imagine what that would look like, right? Because we now have no precedence for it for a 12 team, in terms of looking what the. But yeah, I think you're still. I mean, maybe you get in with 3 losses, perhaps. Just depends on where those three losses are. But I think probably you need to have a 2 loss or less season still to be able to make the playoffs, even in a 12 team format. So yeah, I think it'll be fascinating to watch and just to see those types of things, because I mean, at this point, obviously, when you kind of extrapolate that over a 12 team, for a 4 team, what is it? We've not have we ever had a team with 2 losses make the playoffs? I don't think we have. So
No.
so if you extrapolate that over, to 12 teams, you got to be thinking 3 losses is probably the max that you would be able to make the playoffs. So yeah, it'll be interesting. And like you, Mark, I find the comments interesting. I think it's almost one of those things where you don't completely have the same respect for SEC until you're there, and then understand, okay, what the schedule looks like, week in and week out. And I know it's not, you're not always going to play the Alabama, Georgia, Florida, all these teams like back to back to back or anything like that, but it's a much more grueling schedule than you've been at the past. So just sitting here thinking, oh, there's no way Oklahoma's going 8-4. There's a decent chance, depending on the timeline in which this happens, where it could happen. I mean, all these teams are teams that go into a conference as tough as the SEC, or whatever conference it is, comparatively speaking. You're probably going to take a few lumps early on. So I think the expectation that Oklahoma is just going to roll like they've rolled in the Big 12 is not certainly a good one to have.
And again, like we've talked about in the past, in trying to make that projection, it's not so much that there are many programs or teams in the SEC that are superior to Oklahoma. Pretty much it's Alabama and Georgia right now. It's more so the probability that you're going to get picked off when you just face teams that, again, you would not rate as good as Oklahoma in a 1-game scenario, but when you've got them like stacked 5 in a row, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas, Tennessee, LSU, then the probability of catching one of them on a hot week, and it doesn't have to be, they're loaded with talent. It doesn't have to be some crazy scenario. It's just they're playing their A game and you're playing your B game, and you're going to lose.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the teams that Oklahoma has struggled with over the course of the years, the Iowa States, and I'm not saying that they're bottom feeders, but these are teams that obviously I don't think that we think at this point. Kansas State is another one that Oklahoma would be, or that they would be in the top half of the SEC. So yeah, the competition is going to get stronger, and that's why I think it'll be interesting to look at the timing, right? I mean, is this something that that happens next year? Do they ride it like we talked about last week? I think, do they, both Oklahoma and Texas, ride this out till it gets to 2025 and then go at that point?
It'll be fascinating. Basically, what I would consider to be the first step of the process, to see if there's some disagreement or some logistics that don't work out between the Big 12 adding the 4 and losing Oklahoma and Texas, and to see if there's a possibility of an overlap. I don't think anybody wants that, but to see if it just doesn't quite work out, or it's difficult to, or there's some kind of power play between those two moves. And then, of course, the Texas and Oklahoma alignment in the Big 12 and what, or in the SEC, and what that's going to look like, because that's going to be, once you go to 16 teams in a league, they can only play so many games, and you're going to, they're going to, I got to think that they're going to structure it in a way in which there are certain schools that play all the time. They're going to keep the rivalries that are intact, and then they're going to have some kind of pod system where you play your collection of teams repeatedly. So then you're not going to see a lot of teams in the conference. So it's going to be crucial as to who you're paired with in that system. And of course, there's probably going to be some type of debate argument that we're not going to know of, but you can imagine with all these schools and them determining who they want to stay with, because the SEC is going to be concerned with, as they well should, with integration of those two schools, and not just they're just kind of tacked on to the side of the SEC, but that they're fully integrated. And if they just put them in some pod with Texas A&M and Arkansas, that may not necessarily be a good look or be what they accomplish what they want it to be. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be, like you said, it's going to be so intriguing to see how they do that. I mean, you've got to think. I mean, in some capacity, you've got to think you've got probably Oklahoma and Texas will be in the same pod, of course. They're going to kind of continue that going forward. But then you've probably got Texas A&M in that pod as well to keep some of those rivalries. But the fourth team is interesting. You could make an argument for Arkansas being in there, just kind of from a old Southwest Conference perspective. There could make an argument that Missouri could be there. So I think you'll have, I mean, of those 5, you'll have some combination of the 4 of those in a pod. So yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I think you'll, as an Oklahoma team or Texas, you'll play those teams more frequently, of course, and then you'll have some of those traditional kind of crossover games and things like that. But yeah, I think that's going to be very intriguing. But like we talked last week, I haven't heard anything legitimate from anyone, any sources or anything, seeing where, other than what you had kind of mentioned about Tony, in terms of any kind of a lean one way or the other when this might happen.
I don't know how much weight Missouri carries in the SEC. I got to think, relatively speaking, not much.
Yeah.
Not that they're not a valued member, but they've only been in the league for 10 years, and they are Missouri, which they're a top 40 program in the country. And there's a bunch of top 10 programs in the country in this way, because you got to think that Missouri would want to be in that pod with Texas, Oklahoma, Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
Because geographically, if they don't get in that pod and the SEC chooses Arkansas, and Arkansas is a pretty good fit now that they've been in the league for 30 years with LSU and Ole Miss and Mississippi State, those rivalries and playing them each year have been pretty well established, even though for us old timers, Arkansas, Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, there's a regional feel there and an old Southwest Conference feel. But if they go that route, then Missouri's kind of stuck out there by themselves geographically and having to travel to schools that really aren't connected to them like they currently do, playing in the SEC Eastern Division.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's you would think that probably Missouri, I mean, to your point, Missouri probably belongs with Oklahoma, Texas, and A&M. I mean, much to your point about that, about the annual rivalry that they've kind of had, LSU and Arkansas, and some of those teams probably makes a little bit more sense from a geography perspective, if nothing else.
Talking Oklahoma football with all of you each and every week here at the Voice of College Football. Please support by hitting the like button. And, of course, share these videos out on social media. Keep in mind that you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you're on other platforms that I probably have never heard of. But those people don't know that we're here talking Oklahoma football each and every week at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. So share the link and let people know that we're here talking OU football, and should start having some information come out from spring practice here starting next week. Let's see here. If there was anything else I wanted to get to. Oh, the Matt Wells edition. As an off-the-field analyst, Matt Wells, of course, most recently the head coach at Texas Tech, got fired after a 5-3 start. And then he had done a nice job at Utah State to get the move to the Big 12 at Texas Tech. And actually, as a side note, was the first coach we ever had here on as the Voice of College Football when he was at Utah State. But Matt Wells is now at OU.
Yeah, it was a little bit under the radar, Mark. That kind of was announced yesterday, kind of along with some of the other stuff around the spring practice getting started. So yeah, I think that's a great addition to Oklahoma's off the field staff. Obviously, he's an analyst in an off the field role for Oklahoma, and I think that's part of what Oklahoma has done a much better job of, and part of what one of the, and I don't want to necessarily call it an ultimatum, but was something that Brent Venables talked to Joe Castiglione and President Joe Harris about before taking the job. It's like, these are some of the things that we need to do to be successful, at the level of Alabama, at the level of Clemson, which kind of talks about the off-field stuff, and then kind of the recruiting team that they have. So yeah, I think he'll be a valuable asset to this team. If nothing else, to your point, considering the success that he had at Utah State, and then the oddness, I guess, of him getting let go at 5-3 this year at Texas Tech. So, and I think there's a comment here. I know that there's a lot of people that are very skeptical of any kind of Texas Tech linkage coming back to Oklahoma, but I think this one's pretty good, just in terms of there's no real correlation to anybody from kind of from the Lincoln Riley tree there, or any of the coaches that have been here previously. So I think it'll be valuable, having as good of a staff that Oklahoma has on the field, just bolstering that with what all they have off the field as well. That it's critical to the success of these programs.
When you look at Matt Wells' tenure at Texas Tech, the reason I kind of emphasized the 5-3 record when he got fired was I was a bit surprised just on the surface by that decision mid-season. So he had gone 4-8 in a complete season and 4-6 in the COVID season. Then he gets off to a 5-2 start. He's 5-2 at Texas Tech. They lose by 1 point to a pretty respectable Kansas State team, and he gets fired. So I thought on the surface, wow, that's kind of interesting, because Texas Tech doesn't appear to have that high of standards that they're firing a coach that was just 5-2 a couple days ago and lost by 1 point to a pretty good football team. We had a Texas Tech person on here from 247 Sports that put it better into context of some other things surrounding the program and the look of the team and continued mistakes and sloppy play and lack of improvement that made a lot more sense. But Matt Wells is on board at OU. All right. All right, folks, every Wednesday, Oklahoma Football Talk. We take your comments, we take your questions, and once again, I know I've asked you this a million times, Jason. When is the spring game?
It's going to be April 23rd.
April 23rd.
Yeah, April 23rd at 3 p.m. We talked a little bit about the TV. It's on. It's actually being, excuse me. It's actually being broadcast through Sooner Sports TV, which is a subscription-based, being able to watch that as well. So there's some cable outlets that are showing it on Bally Sports, but it's not something that's it's not like ESPN where it's readily available to everyone.
All right. So I will let everyone know. I don't know what Jason's plans are for the spring game. Maybe he doesn't even know at this point, but I will say that throughout the month of April, I'm planning on going live each and every Saturday, especially the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd are primarily when most of the big programs have their spring games. So I'm going to be going live each and every Saturday. And so whether it's Jason or myself, somebody will be here live after the Oklahoma spring game, and I hope to get some access to that game. But we'll be here,
Absolutely.
one of us.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Good stuff, Jason. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
As
like you
always.
said, hopefully next week we'll have a little bit more, sorry to interrupt there, but a little bit more details in terms of anybody that's impressing, looking good, any kind of stories, any notes or anything like that from first week spring practice. So I think we'll be good. If any questions or anything like that related to to depth chart or anything like that, we can talk through that.
My apologies, everyone, for the phone call, but the phone's not close enough that I can control that, and it runs through the audio board for my call-in show. So my apologies. But everyone, appreciate you being here for our 50th edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live. Hit the like button on your way out. Be back here next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. But please also subscribe and hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Every so often, we need to change it up. Jason, have a great week, and everybody catch Jason and the rest of the crew there at Last Word on college football. All right, man. Good to see you, and we'll catch you next week.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.